Welcome back to the show. I'm B. Dougie, and you're about to learn the secret sauce. Yeah, so Koppel, welcome so much to San Francisco. Have you been to San Francisco yet?
I've been twice, but both quite short trips. So
was it during Supabase times or previously?
Yeah, one time with so one as a tourist, and then one as sort of Supabase to do some fundraising for 1 week only, and then now this one's more like this sort of stuff, which is obviously a lot more fun.
Excellent, yeah. So I'm happy you're here because I live here. So, but you have a very interesting story, which is Supabase. But I wanted to actually cover like the origin story of Supabase. So Supabase, actually, do you want to explain what Supabase is before we even get to there?
Sure, yeah. So Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative. We're building the features of Firebase, but we're using existing open source tools wherever possible. And really what we are is kind of a Postgres as a service company. We do a lot of stuff around Postgres. You sign up, you get a full Postgres database, and then we provide these tools that make Postgres incredibly easy to use. Automatic APIs, real-time functionality, auth, storage, and now edge functions. So that's the core of it, really providing this developer platform that's incredibly easy to use for backend.
Excellent. Yeah, cool. So I'm a big Firebase fan. You actually were on my podcast, Jamstack Radio. If anybody hasn't heard of it, Google it. We learned a bit about the story, but like we're, I think, 2 years later at this point.
Yep.
So can we... why Firebase open source alternative? Like, how did you get to that point where you wanted to build that?
Yeah, so we were using Firebase in my previous company. I had a startup, quite different, not a DevTools company, but our stack was basically Postgres, and then we were using Firebase for one part of it. It was a messaging part, which Firebase is incredibly good at. But we hit a scaling issue around just the number of receipts we were getting out of the database. So I had to migrate it into the Postgres database that we had. And in that process, of course, Postgres does not have real-time functionality. Yeah. So I ended up, went through a few iterations, but I wrote a real-time engine using Elixir, and I open sourced that around the end of 2019. And it started getting traction, and that was kind of the impetus for starting Supabase. I knew I wanted to do a DevTools company, but that was kind of the thing that lit the flame and kickstarted it all.
Well, was that called Supabase at that point?
No.
What was it called then?
It was just called, the engine was just called Real-Time.
Real-Time?
Yeah, because, I'm a big fan of just naming things for exactly what they do. So
it's better than like pink, purple, pookie pants.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what am I using this library for.
Well, and developers never know. I think is one thing. They're not very good at just saying what it is first. So I always try to name things exactly what they do.
So where is Real-Time now? Did that get embedded into what Supabase is today?
Yeah, we just created a new org. It was under my personal account, and we just shifted it in there, and now we park everything under Supabase.
Okay, excellent. So Supabase... So when did you officially say, okay, we need an org, we're going to make this a real thing?
Yeah, so end of 2019, that's when it started getting traction, and I thought, now's the time to do Supabase. I'd kind of been planning to do this database company for a while, and I approached my co-founder and pitched him on the idea. I think I pitched him the idea of actually like an app, like a app store for Postgres or something like that, where it had a bunch of functionality.
I mean, that would be useful.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's essentially what we've done.
Yeah, you have the Supabase plugins.
With Supabase, we've got extensions and everything that we build for Postgres. So it's kind of like that, but the positioning for the Firebase alternative, we started building that. I convinced him to join. He also had a startup, and he left that to work on Supabase with me. And we were talking to a lot of people and finding out what they like and what they use. And everyone loved Postgres, and everyone used Firebase. And so we discovered, the reason why is because it's just so easy to use Firebase. It's great.
Yeah, the developer experience was like. So I use Firebase. I was a wannabe iOS developer. I had learned Swift and Objective-C, then Swift, and then React Native eventually. But Firebase was like Core Data, I think, is like the out-of-the-box data solution for Xcode and Objective-C or whatever. Okay. But Firebase made it so easy because it like the developer experience of knowing, okay, I just want to filter on this table.
Exactly.
Let me do that.
Yeah.
And that's what I could do. And I think with Supabase, like, which I mentioned already, but like I'm building a Supabase project powered for open source for like, literally this channel, which is hotopenSauce.pizza. And I just had like a sort of like a dream of, hey, what if I can just search for projects that people are interested in contributing to? Where am I going to store this? Supabase. It's easy. I can just ship it. So I won't get into more details on how this works, but I'm just injecting or actually inserting a bunch of repos in there and updating the data like on a cron job every now and then.
A Postgres cron job or?
No, I'm actually using GitHub Actions to do that.
Okay.
I could use a Postgres. Honestly, I need to move off Actions because like we're going to hit. This is the only project I could actually even hit action limits.
Okay, yeah.
And it's because what we're doing is we're essentially scraping some parts of GitHub and trying to make it useful for folks to find projects. But yeah, we're going to have to eventually migrate off of Actions. But for now, we're using that. We'll get a little more sophisticated later.
Sure.
But I loved how easy I basically spent a couple streams because everything I did to build this project was live streaming.
Okay, yeah.
So like learning Supabase and learning all this stuff was like live on air.
Cool.
And it was extremely approachable.
Cool. So it was really built in public.
Yeah, for sure. It's all open source, built in public. Cool. You can follow all the pathway. But sorry, we diverged. We were talking about Firebase and the developer experience.
Yeah, so at that point, we thought, well, that's really the goal. We just want to make Postgres as easy to use as Firebase. And so we actually just adopted that positioning, the open source Firebase alternative. That day, someone posted us on Hack and News, and it went kind of crazy. We went from like 8 databases to 800 overnight. We had a hosted platform from day one, so you can sign up. And typically, open source projects start with just the self-hosting and then Go platform. But we decided we'd go straight in. And since then, it's just been building out. Firebase, to their credit, is like a huge suite of tools, and it's a lot to build. So we're just always playing catch up. So
you convince Ant, who's your co-founder, to leave his previous startup to join you.
Yep.
How are you connected to Ant before?
Yeah, so we both moved to Singapore at the same time, actually, and we did this program called Entrepreneur First, which is quite cool. It started in the UK, and they've got accelerators all around the world. And what they do is they just throw like 100 people in a room together. The idea is that you form a startup in that room, but it's quite deep tech. So like people doing quantum computing. I was working on the metaverse. This is like 2017, I think.
Okay, wow.
And like augmented reality, all sorts of weird stuff. He started a crypto company back then. And then I ended up dropping out and doing another startup with someone I knew. And we didn't work together there, but we ended up living together in this like hacker house of like 5 people all doing different startups. And after a couple of years of building my next startup, I thought, well, now's the time. Who's the best techie I know? And he is. So I literally had to I sat him down, pitched him, had a deck, and told him what we're going to build, and he kindly agreed.
That is awesome. I mean, to get someone as talented as Ant and to also convince him to say yes to your startup over his startup.
Yeah, well, the way I convinced him was I knew what he really wanted. He had applied 5 times to get into Y Combinator. Yeah. So I just pitched him on the idea that we're going to assemble this team that they could not say no to, Y Combinator. Yeah. And he said, all right, I'll agree.
That is amazing. Yeah. I was also declined from Y Combinator as
well, it's hard to get into.
Yeah.
I think I didn't realize how hard it was to get into, and luckily we did.
Did you apply to Y Combinator previously?
No. I hadn't applied before. I just didn't think my business is suited previously. Y Combinator, but this one clearly did. It's developer tools, and it's it's a Y Combinator company.
Cool. Yeah. So you got into Y Combinator. You started Supabase, and you always I've heard stories of folks get into Y Combinator, but then they pivot. So have you always had the same idea from day one to sort of power through?
Yeah, actually, so before we even got into YC, we updated the tagline on our on our homepage to the open source Firebase alternative, put backed by YC, and that day someone put it on Hacker News, and it went like straight to the top. And usually you wait and you do like a launch Hacker News, and the guy Danji or Dang, who moderates, just said, well, this is now your launch Hacker News.
Yeah.
So he just changed the thing to say launch Hacker News. And so it was very popular, and everyone said what they wanted. Developers are very clear what they want. So we knew that we had sort of hit the right positioning, and we knew what we had to build to reach more customers.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to pivot at all. We just needed to build extra things that they asked for.
Yeah, that's a great position to be in, to be able to say like, okay, we have an active customer base, or I don't know if you were charging at that point, because I know it was a while before you even had pricing, which I feel like now I am underpaying what I'm using you for. So I guess I wanted to ask, you went to YC, but you did it all remotely from Singapore.
Yeah, so the company started January 2020, and that's, I think March 2020 is when COVID really started kicking off in Singapore at least. And so that was the first ever, Summer 20 was the first YC fully remote batch. And we had to do it from Singapore, like during strict lockdowns. So we were just dialing in and doing a lot of midnight phone calls because the time zone is so shocking from Singapore to the US. But it was good because it meant that we could focus just on building, which is really what we should have been doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great time, because I remember that time. Honestly, that's when I got serious on open source.
Okay.
Whereas during lockdown, that's when I started cleaning up code. I added login functionality before you could not log into the product. So I remember that time when I was actually shipping side project stuff, but to work on my company, my full-time business, like that is an amazing time to get started.
Yeah.
So wait, all of you were in Singapore then at that point?
Yeah, well, there weren't many of us. So when we sort of got in, there were 3, and probably by the end of YC, we had maybe 6 or 7 people. And they're all, we're fully distributed, the company. And, like during YC, they say don't hire, but we had so much to build that we knew techies from our previous companies that we could bring in. And additional ones, like, for example, we use a tool called Postgres, which is with a T, and it auto-generates an API on top of your Postgres database. And luckily, I had been in touch with the maintainer of that, and I reached out to him just to say, hey, we're in YC, and we're using this just to let you know. I try to make sure we give props to any tool that we're using. And he said, well, I'm looking for a job, and he was in Peru. So because we're fully remote and distributed, we said, well, just work full-time on it, and we'll pay you to do that. So that was kind of the start of like us thinking, well, we can find these great developers everywhere, and why not just make the whole company like this, fully distributed as much as we can.
Yeah, and speaking of finding great developers, Supabase, majority of the product is open sourced. Mm-hmm. And it's been open sourced since day one. So like, what was the reason for being open source?
Yeah, well, I think mainly, and to myself, first of all, are philosophically aligned to everything being collaborative and open source and sharing. That's number one. And, it's just a better world if we're improving existing technology rather than always coming up with new ways of doing things and which have already been solved in the past. So that's part of the Postgres story, Postgres. Each of these tools are already great. Why build yet another one of these? So that's one reason. There's many of the other reasons which everyone speaks to. Of course, it's great for developers. There's no lock-in. You can self-host. All these are additional really neat features. But to be honest, the core of it is just because we like that version of the world better than a proprietary one.
But are you not concerned about competitive advantage or edge or anything like that?
Not really. There's parts of Supabase that we expect people will take, and Supabase is kind of a suite of tools, right? So it's kind of like, well, which part of Supabase are they going to take? Maybe some of our extensions. We've got a GraphQL extension, which I know a lot of people are interested in. But otherwise, we're using tools which are already open source, and we like Postgres. We kind of owe it to Postgres to keep everything open source because we're leveraging Postgres itself.
Yeah.
So it's a give and take. Yeah.
Yeah. It's beneficial because then, I mean, it probably is easier. You mentioned you hadn't been able to hire during YC, but just finding people to work on Supabase, you can just look directly in like the open source repo, right?
Yeah, like our hiring strategy is basically, especially at the start, we were just getting people contributing, and then they were becoming too good to ignore, and we just said, well, do you want to do that full time?
Yeah.
So that was great. That's just yet another benefit of open source. And people who we hire now, we look at their open source contributions, what they've been doing. Are they philosophically aligned in the same way and motivated by the same things? So, yeah, I mean, there's so many benefits to open source.
Yeah, and how do you what's your step for even discovering how do you even notice someone's like, hey, you keep showing up in my PRs, and we keep merging you?
You just notice them, I guess. Like I heard there's a tool coming up that we can.
Yeah. So I mean, we open source. Like we're building a platform. So like the thing that's still a work in progress is what we've been provided from GitSense, and like I even pointed out Mild Tomato as someone who's like sticking out as like a sore thumb of like, hey, this person's doing a lot of good work, or it could be bad work. Who knows? But like obviously, there's somebody you should probably talk to.
Yep.
And you'd mentioned.
Well, that's Johnny, so he works in Supabase. I expect him to be a little bit higher, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll have a word to Johnny after this.
Okay, yeah. Well, we definitely don't want to basically crack the whip.
But there's plenty of people inside that
this is for the Supabase, the flagship repo too as well. So like we're not even breaking down because I know Johnny from the UI repo and had a quick conversation with him through email just because we're going to be leveraging the Supabase UI. This spoiler.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of solve problems in there.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm getting at is like there's a really good indicator of like there's some folks who are making contributions and then even it looks like you're leveraging Gitstart and they're doing a good job of making contributions as well. But like Isaiah has got 5 PRs in the last month. Mm-hmm. Like, is that an employee as well?
No, so that's one, he's a 15-year-old kid in the US. And he just started contributing, and while he was at school, he just started like really contributing. And then we said, well, we'll give you an internship if you want. We'll pay you for this. And so that's like we just noticed him and made him an offer. Yeah,
that's amazing because so we just had the CTO of Fig come through and do one of these interviews with us, and he had mentioned that he at 15 was working for Foursquare.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
And so it's like almost like a sort of inverse, similar situation, but also a very common thing. I hear a lot of like 15, 16-year-olds who have some free time and want to get down and dirty in some code bases with a bunch of adults, and it's a good way to get your feet wet in the industry.
Definitely, yeah.
Not required by any means, but I think having access to this type of information, that's what we're trying to work on with open source.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about open source in general. Like we didn't know that he was 15, right? We just look at the quality of his code and it's good, and you can be whatever you want and contributing. It really does not matter. Your work speaks for itself. So that's kind of cool as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so I mean, hopefully we can be beneficial to you in the future as we can highlight even folks who are contributing to some of the extraneous outside projects as well. But one thing that also intrigued me, so you mentioned the Supabase is a suite of tools. Mm-hmm. So like, do you, off the top of your head, like what does that make up?
Yep. Really there's like, first of all, you start at the bottom as Postgres, and everything we do kind of centers around Postgres. And then like there are, when you think about the main things that you need when you're starting a business are auth. So we've got an auth server, which you mentioned, GoTrue. Then there's an API. So we've got PostgREST, which auto-generates APIs. And when you think about APIs, we've kind of got 3: a RESTful API, a GraphQL API, and a real-time API. Then we've got storage for storing large files, images, videos, things like that. And then we've got one final thing now, which is edge functions. And all of these things work together, and they're very nicely integrated with the database, row-level security. We leverage Postgres as much as we can.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good suite of tools, and it's funny because like I've been growing the open source product around those tools, like edge functions thing that we've been waiting for. Because like that's one of the things like we're still using actions for is because like I always wanted to like do some transformations of the data we're just ingesting and like. So the one thing we have is we have voting, and specifically like when you calculate the votes for the day.
Yep.
like we want to essentially build like the product hunt for open source projects.
Okay, cool.
And we can't do that until we can just like run the cron to basically say, okay, this is the votes for today, here are the votes for the week, here's who is worth celebrating, and then like generate the newsletter.
Yep.
So like that's the roadmap for this one product.
Okay, cool.
And we can now do that all in Supabase.
Nice. Okay.
Which is amazing. Now, I could do it now because I'm now working full time on OpenSauce, but I just didn't have time to build it myself live on stream. So look out for it. By the time this video comes up, maybe we've advanced to the point where now people can leverage this on a weekly, daily basis. Cool. I didn't mean to be like, oh wow, we're using Supabase. This is like
well,
commercial.
I like it. You can promote Supabase as much as you want.
This podcast,
I'm glad. Like this is actually very convenient because you can talk about the features related to what you're building.
This is why I'm super happy to have you here in the Bay Area and in San Francisco to chat with you in person for the first time, because we've actually chatted a couple times. And it was funny because I think we chatted on the Actually, I don't think we chatted. You talked with Mish from GitHub.
Yeah, exactly.
On Open Source Friday to talk about Supabase. And I don't even think you were in YC at that point. Or you might have just gotten to YC.
Yeah, exactly. And then we chatted, I think, on the heavy bit.
Yeah, I had you on the podcast like maybe 6 or 7 months later.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think you had then announced your seed fund or something like that.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, the timeline, like it's funny because it seems so quick. Probably super fast for you.
Well, yeah, it's been just over 2 years since we started, 2.5 years maybe. But a lot's happened.
Yeah, and congratulations on the Series B that was announced probably a couple weeks ago.
Yep, yeah, exactly. We just raised $80 million from Felicis, was the lead investor, and then we had Cotu join as well, who have been great investors.
Yeah, I see them a lot.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, it's funny because you had mentioned in passing in like another conversation. Never heard of the VC firm, but now I'm seeing them in quite a few other open source and dev tools as well.
It's pretty cool actually because they, not to promote them too much, but I mean they deserve it because like they're a big hedge fund and I'd never heard of them. But after YC, we thought, oh, let's just raise money from angels, developer angels. You would know. Yeah. So we reached out to a bunch of developer angels and people who understood what we were trying to build, and we just planned to raise money from just angels, no VCs. Yeah. And then they came in and just kind of gave us an offer we couldn't refuse. And they said, well, we still want you to take the money from the angels, so we'll leave plenty of room for them if you want. Yeah. And so that was cool. We just had like this big hedge fund give us some money and a bunch of angels, and from there it kind of accelerated it. They did our Series A, so I didn't really need to do too much work for it. Wow. And then
it sounds like you just kind of got in the right place at the right time. Singapore, YC, remote, but also like you mentioned it. I'm an angel of Supabase, so I got into that round, which I appreciated. Like I got introduced by I think a few people in that round. Yeah. So I think Sean Swix, I call him Sean, but everybody knows him by Swix. Yeah. Ihani. Yeah. And then there was a third person who all three of them reached out to me. Was like, hey, you should talk to Koppel. And I was like, actually, I already talked to him. Yeah. Like he was on my podcast. Yeah. So then I reached out and I was like, oh, hey, you're doing a round. Like, let me join. Had to be my first angel investment. Was it? Okay, cool. But it was also the first time I heard of folks leveraging DevRel as like a pool of angel investors. And I've seen the trend pick up. Oh, really? A lot. Okay. Yeah, I've seen more because I get a lot of people reaching out to me. Cool. I don't say yes to everything, but if it's good, let me know. Yep. But I think it's genius because in DevRel, I get GitHub. When I was DevRel at GitHub, I don't talk about GitHub all the time when I'm doing DevRel. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, it's enough is enough. Yeah. Like you already know the features and the product, you already know my content. But I get an opportunity to talk about Supabase because Supabase is on GitHub. Mm-hmm. So my tactic for DevRel at GitHub has always been, let's just talk about the stuff they're using. Like if you're using actions or if you're using this or discussions, I can talk about that. Yeah. It makes it so much easier. Yeah, exactly. And like for me to angel into like, yes, there's a conflict of interest, but at GitHub, I'm not actually selling anything. It's all free open source customers. So anyway, I think it's genius. I appreciate it.
I mean, it wasn't so much the tactic that we wanted them to necessarily, the angels to promote us, but like I actually have a bit of a I'm not a huge fan of VCs. They typically like push you in the wrong direction, whereas like angels are just way more chill. So that was kind of what
they're invested in you.
and they kind of
success.
get how slow maybe like open source projects take a long time. Database projects take even longer. So they kind of get that more than VCs with their 5-year life cycle. So that was really the reason. But it turned out to be great because we did some nice blog posts about the angels and why they invested and what was important, and it turned out to be a great tactic as well.
Yeah, and speaking of tactic in blog posts, who's running your Twitter account?
Well, right now, it's mostly Ant.
And okay,
and is the meme king.
He apparently is because I actually in DevRel circles, I point to the Supabase Twitter account all the time.
Okay.
So I'm glad that I know who it is because I had assumptions, but I was all wrong. Like I didn't know it was Ant who was driving the meme king.
Yeah. He's great, and it's one that's very hard to replicate. It's hard to hire someone who gets the exact developer mindset / meme funniness. What's okay, what's not. So. And he's been going quite hard at the moment on the memes. So I think every time he kind of takes it over, we just see engagement go through the roof.
I mean, but there's I'm trying to find a good one recent, but they're good enough that like even GitHub's picking them up. So I think there was one of the kid who was streaming and had like the flamethrower and everything like that.
The Twitch streamer,
and like it was like a perfect meme. And like even GitHub, like I was like, well, to be honest, I went to the GitHub Slack and I was like, hey, we need to retweet this.
We saw a few people, and we've got actually like every time we meet our investors, we send them a meme first, and then we go through the monthly updates of that. But so like it's really just part of our culture, and we see plenty of people steal them, but that's great. I mean, we also take memes from other people. That's how Twitter should be.
I mean, it's genius, and I think even like you mentioned before, I think we hit record like Supabase around 35 folks. Like you've been able to sort of keep that culture intact, but also keep it remote and friendly because you don't have a centralized location.
No.
I imagine you're centralized in Delaware, probably.
Yeah, so our company's set up in Delaware officially, and we have an entity in Singapore, but we're fully distributed. So 35 across 17 countries, I think it is at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so how do you make decisions in the open source side?
Like what products and things to...
Yeah, I mean, you have a roadmap, but you also have folks who are contributing.
Okay, yeah.
So how do you make sure, like, do you just let folks contribute where they feel like they want to contribute, or do you try to nudge people in the right direction? Yeah,
well, what you'll find mostly with these larger projects is that the contributors will come in and they'll do the easy things. So we try to give a few layups, so to speak, on what they can contribute.
I love basketball.
Yeah, okay. Well, by the time that this comes out, we should actually do a prediction. Who do you think is going to win?
I was saying Warriors in 5, but this is game 6, so Warriors in 7.
Okay. So
no, Warriors in 6.
Okay, we should do a bet on it. I'll take the counter position. By the time that this comes out, we'll pay up. So $10 on the Celtics.
Return to a familiar place. They're on top of the NBA world. The 4th title in 8 years. The Dubs dynasty is still very much alive.
Yeah, $10. All right. Do you take Cash App?
Yeah. But basically, so the contributors, they come in usually and do the small things like client libraries and things. We try to make sure that we leave space for contributors, and the larger ones will employ maintainers, so they have their own roadmaps. But then otherwise, like the bigger features is largely up to us. Like we don't have to really say no to too many things.
Okay.
Sometimes we have to like put a hold on some things. Like at the moment, there's interest in contributing Web3 logins to go through, which would be very cool. But the EIP, the spec, is not formalized yet, so it might introduce some security concerns. So on occasion, we have to say no or not yet. But it hasn't been too much of an issue.
Okay. Cool. And then can you explain the SupaSquad? Because I discovered what the SupaSquad was a couple months ago.
Yep.
So what is that?
Yeah, well, largely we saw these people coming in and contributing a lot, and we thought, we want to pay them if we can. So we have a squad of people that can either be paid or unpaid. It doesn't matter. We just try to bring them in, make them kind of a bit more part of the family. They can see the roadmap a little bit more. We'll have events and hangouts. If they're really contributing and maintaining, we'll also sponsor them for that through Open Collective. And that one's tricky because, like, actually, a lot of the time we'll pay people and then they lose interest in contributing.
You know, honestly, I've seen the same thing with OpenSauced where folks, if their first contribution is a paid issue, it's usually the last contribution. But if they've come through and they're like, they've shown interest and asked questions, and I'm like, hey, I've got a bigger problem, then they end up sticking around and they're like, oh yeah, I'll solve bigger problems with you.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because, I get the mindset. Like, you don't want to, if you're contributing in your spare time, you don't want it to be a job. You kind of want to do it for fun. So, like, then if you're going to pay them, you've got to pay them enough that it is kind of their job and it's going to be replaced. And so it puts incentives kind of out. So, you know, it's a very hard one to actually strike the balance for open source contributors. But for the most part, everyone loves swag. Everyone loves stickers. We try to make sure that we give back in some way for the amount that they're giving us.
Or you can pay them in memes as well.
Yeah, that too. And just and if nothing else, like, people enjoy contributing. They'll like post on Twitter and we'll promote them that they're doing that. They can put it on their CV. We see people applying to Supabase, like saying
with PRs that say, hey, I did this thing for you.
Exactly. And they've got it in their CV, which they're probably sending to other companies that they're an open source contributor to Supabase, which I think is cool. That's what people should do.
Yeah, there's a GitHub repo, which is the resume, which will generate a resume of your contributions. It was created years ago. I don't think it's actually still being maintained. Actually, one of the ideas we have for open source is to be able to export your resume and be like, hey, job please.
Yeah, we really take that as one of the leading indicators when we employ people. We look through their history and what contributions they've done, which organizations they're like involved in. So I think it's cool.
I mean, it's almost like there should be a tool to be able to make this a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I can't wait until this fall when we could actually share more of this.
Definitely.
For sure, yeah. So, I mean, this is a great conversation. I don't want to wind this down right away yet because we didn't even touch on your launch weeks and the things that you've been doing. So, like, when was the last launch week? It was probably a month or two ago?
Yeah, end of March.
End of March, okay.
So a few months ago, yeah.
So what's the thought process to that? Because like they seem very consistent, and they always have usually like pretty hefty features like that people have been waiting for. They show up in the launch weeks.
Yeah. So basically, you know, what normally happens is you ship, and then no one takes time to market what they shipped or to tell people what they've shipped. So we basically take this philosophy that we do the ship and shout sort of strategy. So at some point, you've got to put down like your coding brain and pick up your marketing brain and just say, hey, here's what you asked for, and here's how you can now use it. And that's what we do with the whole company. So we, at the end of YC, we had this this thing where we launched our auth, which everyone was asking for. And when we did that, we saw like a lot more people interested in Supabase. And so we decided, well, that's obviously a winning strategy. You ask for something, we ship it, we tell you about it. Yeah. Why don't we do that? And then it so happened that we were just shipping so much that we had too much to say in one day that we decided, well, why don't we just make it a whole week? Yeah. And so we started doing these launch weeks. I think we did 3 in 2021. We've done 1 so far this year. And we try to ship one thing every single day. And usually on the Friday, there might be like a few things shipped or a few things announced. Get them all out. We just got to chuck them all in. And a couple of times it coincides with maybe like Halloween or April Fools, so we'll do some jokes as well, and of course a bunch of memes.
Yeah, it's awesome because like I don't know if it was last time or the one time before, but like GraphQL got shipped. Mm-hmm. That was something I was waiting for because OpenSauced were heavy in the GraphQL. Honestly, we're not using GraphQL yet, but we did do a rewrite, and we'll probably introduce that soon. Cool. But I appreciate it because like I don't have time to like check out release notes. Yep. Or even like blog posts, but like when I know it's a launch week, I know I'm just gonna turn notifications on for the Twitter channel. Cool. And just like get notified when things are shipping. So life hack: if you want to be a part of the next launch week, turn on the notifications on Twitter.
Yeah.
But you also even coincide like hackathons around the launch weeks as
Yeah,
well?
we do hackathons, and usually the first day is reserved for promoting other communities within the sort of Supabase ecosystem. So it can be either the tools, like we might try promote Postgres or PostgREST, and we'll talk about the things people are building, maybe like open source, and then we'll really try to. It's one thing that's unique about Supabase. We're kind of a community of communities, and so we try to make sure that we put the spotlight on others as well.
Love it.
And usually that's our Monday, and then from then on.
All right. Well, we'll see you the next Hack Week.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we're about to. I'm so excited to be in the position to be able to like play with tools like this and like keep up to date with things and ship some cool features. And I'm super appreciative of you taking time out of your busy week, meeting with investors and community members and customers. But with that said, folks, check out Supabase if you haven't. It's open source alternative to Firebase. It's an awesome product. I'm not only a card-holding member, I'm also an investor and a super fan as well, which I don't know if that's already something you already coined.
It is now. That's great.
Right.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me on the podcast, and thanks for using Supabase.
All right. Well, you heard it first, and stay saucy, everyone.